Hello and welcome to another Atypical and Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Frontline update for the 23rd of December 2022, so it's getting dangerously close to Christmas, but always remember, like whoop-de-whoop, excellent, oh, festive time. People are in trenches and having explosions around them and dying, lying in mud. Just have a thought, I guess, over this festive period about other people around the world. It doesn't have to be in Ukraine, even. I mean, this is my I suppose, moral proclamation here that, when we have it easy, think about those who have it more difficult than us, no matter where they are in the world. Anyway, let's go on to the frontline updates. Well, actually, the overnight news and other things to think about. The official figures that the Ukrainians bring out for the Russian losses are out as ever, and it's worth talking about a little bit about how accurate these are, or perhaps how accurate they aren't. Anyway, let's just go through the numbers. 550 liquidated personnel, so fairly high. 2 tanks, 5 APCs, 6 artillery systems, 1 MLRS, 5 UAVs or drones, 7 other vehicles and fuel tanks. Now, I always look at these as kind of indicative. If the numbers of liquidated personnel are high, then there's been some barracks that have been bombed. There's been some tough days on the front lines in certain places. It gives me a kind of indication of what's going on. If I don't necessarily believe the exact figures. 6 artillery systems for me is indicative that actually a few bits of artillery have been hit, and that's going to be problematic for the Russians going forward. And if that's even higher, then I think, okay, really bad day for that. There's an interesting thread. So people argue about how accurate these are, whether you halve them, whether you 60% off, 40% off, 30% off, whatever. I still think they're indicative and useful to some extent. The ones that some people say are the least accurate are the aircraft. So 283 aircraft, 267 helicopters. There's a really interesting thread by Ukraine Memes for NATO Teens. It says, I don't know who needs to hear this, but Ukraine's claimed losses for Russian forces are fantastical and completely made up. Ukraine indulges in propaganda, as does everyone. And this is a pro-Ukrainian source, by the way. And I don't fault them for it, but they're absolutely pulling numbers out of thin air. No need to repeat them. I don't know. I actually disagree with this to some extent. And there's an interesting chat that goes on in all of the thread, and he does a good job of kind of countering different arguments and putting his side across. I would agree that the aircraft, he says the aircraft is the one that's the most outrageous. When you look at things like open source intelligence like Oryx, the numbers they have for confirmed losses of tanks are about 1,600. So this is not quite double, but getting there. But then the question is, well, do the Ukrainians include infantry fighting vehicles in that number, or do they include them in armored personnel, so APCs? Because APCs are different from IFVs. And if that's the case, then actually that number is pretty accurate. If that's not the case, then okay, they're or almost double, but not quite double. Is that still within the realms of possibility, given that Oryx is confirmed losses, photographically confirmed losses, so they're the absolute conservative end of that, so on and so forth. So the question for the troops is that dead people, or does that include wounded in action and POWs? Because actually 100,000 wounded in action and KIA and POWs is really quite reasonable. If it's just killed, then that is probably very generous. But still, again, if I take that 100,000 troops having been killed and take 30,000 off 70,000 troops, if I take 30% off that, that is still hugely damaging for the Russian capability and capacity. And so for me, these are indicative, and I'm not so interested in the totals. Like when I read out these figures to you, I only look at these, the white figures. I don't, because actually that's fairly arbitrary. Like 3,000 tanks, well, what does that mean in total? I'm more interested in what the daily figures are and whether that represents a good or a bad day for the Russians, if you see what I mean. And I hope that gives you an idea of what's going through my mind anyway. Okay, let's quickly rush through some news. First group of Ukrainian soldiers have finished training in the Czech Republic. I think there are more troops now being to be trained in the UK as well, and this is going on in a number of countries. Rheinmetall, German manufacturer, has begun supplying 26-man HX 8x8 trucks for the armed forces of Ukraine on behalf of the German government. Now, these are trucks that can come in lots of different shapes and sizes. Well, not necessarily sizes, but they the ones with cranes on the back, or are they they're just basically cargo lorries? Are they a bit of everything? So you have a number of different ways of configuring these trucks. But either way, very useful, and the Ukrainians are definitely going to need these. These are heavy duty, 8 wheels. So that's yeah, so some of these are 6-wheelers. That looks like a 10-wheeler. These are the 8-wheelers, so it's going to be these the 4x4. Um, Although they say 8x8 in this, so I'm not 100% sure what's going on there. I would say that's probably 4x4. Anyway, moving on, Chinese banks have fully joined the sanctions against Russia. Wow, they comply with all sanctions imposed by the US Treasury. They do not cooperate with Russian credit institutions that have fallen under sanctions, Mikhail Zadornov of the Otkritie Bank says. So that's fascinating. And to add to that, no longer neutral, Switzerland expands sanctions lists against Russia. The Federal Council decided to impose sanctions against 141 institutions of 49 legal entities. All of them appear in the 9th sanctions package of the European Union. So each passing week, each passing month, sanctions are becoming more and more difficult for the Russian nation and for their economy, and for individual entities as well. And to add Switzerland and to some extent China onto that means that the net is closing on Russia, and they must really be feeling the pain of these sanctions. Uh, Also worth noting, I meant to mention this, I think yesterday or the day before, I think, Russian or international gas prices have absolutely plummeted. They've gone right back down, and that will hurt Russia, as they won't be able to command a high price for their natural resources. Okay, let's move to the assassination of collaborators and other Russian occupied entities. Collaborator Andriy Stepa has been assassinated in Lyubimivka, Kherson Oblast, a car bomb. So that's the car bomb there. Pretty vicious. And there's been another one just now, I believe, in Melitopol. Another car bomb happened right in the center near the park, according to multiple sources. There it is. Not sure who the victim was. There are questions about assassinations. You see pro-Russian sources like, is this how you treat democracy? It's like, yeah, not really 100% sure it is democracy going on in a forcibly occupied region. So, but there is some moral discussion to be had around such assassinations. I know that I was challenged by a Russian troll on my threads with regard to the shelling of the restaurant in Donetsk, where the former deputy Russian leader, I believe, was hit, and someone else as well. The idea is, well, if you're going to have a birthday celebration in a restaurant 12 kilometers from the front line of a huge war, then I don't know. I don't know that that is a war crime, Mr. Russian troll. I'd say that, yeah, you're probably being a little bit risky there, and you are also a legitimate target. So, yeah, not 100% sure that they've got a salient point. Russia on fire again. So we've got garages of a military unit are on fire in Moscow. And we've also got in the Saratov region, military commissariat has been burnt in an arson attack. So that continues each day. And the last thing I want to say is in Tokmak in Zaporizhia, the HIMARS have been working again overnight on a barracks. Okay, so don't have any detail about that yet. But what I wanted to just quickly talk about is the asymmetry that's going on here between the Ukrainian hits on the Russians behind their lines and the Russian hits on the Ukrainians. The Russian hits on the Ukrainians appear to be, because they don't have anything like HIMARS, they just are striking within a very close distance to the front line with artillery. And they have the usual artillery hits. Artillery, however, doesn't generally kill huge amounts of people in one fell swoop. Um, if you hit a barracks with artillery, you're going to get, the roof of the building getting damaged. You might lose one or two people, that kind of thing. Whereas HIMARS attacks are far more precise and vicious than an artillery shell. And when you're getting, say, 8 rockets or 8 missiles, sorry, hitting a barracks, then there's going to be a lot of damage done there. And what this means is that each and every day there are these hits on Tokmak, on around the Kherson Oblast, then behind the lines out here. So, reporting from Ukraine did a video pretty much on this, saying that you got these supply routes to Svatove and supply routes down through to Bakhmut. And HIMARS are absolutely hammering Avdivka, Alchevsk, Shaitsa, or I'm not sure of that name there. Other places around there have been hit this last week, time and time again. And these are barracks and command and control centers and ammunition depots and whatnot for the forces in Bakhmut. Do they end up sort of really struggling to make gains in Bakhmut because actually their reinforcements have been hit, their command and control and their ammunition depots have been hit? There's this asymmetry where the Ukraine are really hammering high value targets and Russia aren't. They are sending missiles against the energy infrastructure, but militarily they are not causing too much damage behind the lines. They might be causing damage in places like Bakhmut and Avdivka on the front lines, but behind the front lines, they are fairly impotent. And there's an asymmetry there that is playing into the long-term success of Ukraine on a week-by-week basis. This is happening every single night. These kind of Tokmak attacks are happening every single night. And you've got 20 HIMARS plus other MLRS systems working overtime, softening up behind the lines of the Russian forces. You've got a long-term issue that Russia are facing. This is a problem. This is a big problem for Russia, and there's a very useful asymmetry there. Anyway, let's go on to front lines. Too much preamble. Okay, let's go to the northeast, to our usual starting point, Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna. On my map, that looks like this. So there is this claim from some Ukrainian sources that the Ukrainians are sort of doing counterattacks in the Varichna area and around here. Don't know that there's too much information about exactly what has been gained or lost or whatever, but there is a lot of activity around this Liman Pershi, Tavolzhanka sort of axis. So we shall see what comes out of there. Other than that, there have just been the usual sort of positional battles. I mean, there are claims that has become a positional battle. Stamakivka again, Kuzmivka and Novoselivska. So Novoselivska here, there have been claims that the Russians have repelled attacks around, or there have been repelled Russian attacks around here, but also that the Russians have been shelling Novoselivska. And if they're shelling Novoselivska, that means that there's Ukrainian presence there. As Noel report says, no map changes in the area. Russia shelled the town of Novoselivska again. After the Ukrainians retreated a week ago, it seems activity is heating up in the town again, dominating both the Novoselivska, Kuzmivka. Dominating both of these places is crucial for advance south along the PO7 to Svatova. Absolutely correct. And then as we go further down south, Russia shelled Makivka, Ploshchanka, Chervona-Popivka, Dobrova. This is the third day in a row that Chervona-Popivka is shelled. I'm leaning towards Ukraine in control of the town, and Russian east of the Krasna River and Holikova. Artillery was noted east of Ploshchanka. So again, usual sort of stuff. The ISW pretty much says the same. Positional fighting, positional battles all around. Nothing particularly incredible to report in the area other than this. So this has only just come in today. So Kolomerchika, some kilometers northwest of Svatove, is under Ukrainian control now, says this pro-Ukrainian source, but no visual proofs yet. That would be quite interesting. So this is this settlement here, which has been the target for the Ukrainians for some time. It is just to the west, I would say, not even really northwest, more like to the west of Svatova, or west northwest. And if that is under control of the Ukrainians, that is a huge gain for them, because between that settlement and Svatova is really not many other settlements. And so this will enable them to get that, much vaunted sort of encirclement going of Svatova. So that would be important. But again, I've only seen that in one source and only just now. Okay, let's move on further down south towards Kreminna. As you can see, this is Chervona-Popivka, just north of Kremlin, that we were just talking about. Just to let you know that the map that No Reports has produced indicates that, or he thinks that the Ukrainians control Chervona-Popivka, the entire settlement, and that there's some grey zone between Holikova and the Ukrainians, but they are sort of pushing in that general direction. So that would be looking like really the Ukrainians control Chervona-Popivka up to the Krasna River, and east of the Krasna River, as he said, is Russian control. So I might change that map, but I'm just going to wait a little bit to see what turns out up. The ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American think tank, says Ukrainian forces reportedly continue counteroffensive operations in the Kreminna area. A Russian military blogger claimed that fighting is intensifying in the Kreminna area, where Ukrainian forces conducted reconnaissance in force and probed Russian positions. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted an assault in the direction of Kreminna. This is all very vague. But the idea is that, yeah, it looks like Kreminna itself is under some kind of pressure, or at least the Ukrainian forces are encroaching on the outskirts of Kreminna. And yeah, that's obviously looking good for the Ukrainians around there. Neither side, in terms of sources, says much about what's going on sort of around Bilorivka, and further down south. Spirny, I have just adapted my map for Spirny, just because I saw a source yesterday that was particularly well, had a bit seemed to have some kind of accuracy with Spirny with regard to that. And then, in fact, it looks like the Russians are slightly further back in Spirny, and that the Ukrainians control um, much of the main sort of town itself. But we shall see, because actually, really haven't heard any information about that today, or yesterday even. So really quite quiet in terms of news all the way down until we get to sort of Bilorivka, Yakovlivka, Soledar. A few kind of different claims there. So Defmon says the Ukrainians repulsed attacks around Berestova, Yakovlivka, Soledar, and Bakhmut. As I mentioned yesterday, it seems like the Ukrainian counterattack has calmed down the Russians a bit. They also reset weeks of Russian progress in a few days, but also says a pro-Ukrainian telegram reports that the Ukrainians are counterattacking in the area of Yakovlivka, Bilorivka, and Berestova. I would not trust this too much. Time will tell. So it is difficult to say exactly what's going on just north of there. There are a couple of different claims in the area. But when we come to Bakhmut itself, there are, again, it seems to be pretty good news for the area, for the Ukrainians. Sorry, there's that claim about Spirina. It's a pro-Russian source, Syriac maps. So that's why I took that into account and adapted my maps to reflect that, because I think the Russians themselves are saying that. Then that's probably the case there. So let's have a look at Bakhmut itself. Yes, fighting will be going on in Bilorivka, Yakovlivka, Soledar, but I showed you yesterday how it seems that the Russians have been pushed right back through this industrial unit. Lots of sources saying different things. I've added an extra map to visualize the gains, white dashed areas by the Ukrainians in the counterattacks in the recent week to the south of the grey zone around Opitny is quite big. Russia's strongholds, so this is down here. There are Vazela Dolinia and Zaitsevi, so I'll get onto that in a second. So if you look here, this entire industrial zone pushed right back to the crossroads here. So that is pretty astounding. And in fact, this is the interesting bit there. So behind the aggregates area. So as we come down here, according to No Reports, they're pushed back right to this crossroads, and in fact behind this aggregates area. So that's a huge loss for the Russians. And indeed, if you look up here to that crossroads, you might remember that's this crossroads here, which is the site of the garage that the petrol station, the gas station that was hit with uh, Ukrainian ordnance and was caught on thermal imagery, but then it was a place that the Russians took hold of, and they used that because this is uh, higher ground here. Use that to as a springboard into attacking other places, or at least getting visuals on other places. Well, according to no reports here, they've lost that area. So my map, I want to wait a little bit to see. But if this is true, then the Russians have been really severely pushed back right from the south of Bakhmut to the northeast of Bakhmut, and that it must be a real problem for them. Now, to add to that, there's some geolocated footage that has just come out of the Russians in this industrial area. I'll show you on my map. So here, I think the geolocated footage is to somewhere around here. It might even be there. So if we look, this is where the geolocated footage. Yep. So we've got a couple of different places that are hit. A place here and a place there on that road out of Bakhmut here. So this road, so here and here. So you've got some really significant damage being done, some buildings by the Ukrainians here. Although I can't see any actual Russian troops, the claims that they were hiding in these buildings, and there's some significant explosions going on here. I don't know why, whether it's the ordnance itself that it is exploding or things in some of these buildings, as you'll see in a second. So here you go. That's a big old explosion. So it could be that there's some combustibles in that, maybe some ammunition. Who knows? But that's a really significant explosion. Now, I'm not sure exactly when this happened, whether this is yesterday, 2 days ago, but this indicates that, well, supposedly, according to some sources, it indicates that the Russians were sort of on the way out here, and there's more footage as well. I won't play it all to you just because I need to get on and whatnot, but this apparently shows that the Russians were being put under pressure all the way back here, and then they've been subsequently kicked out this whole area. Now, if that is the case, then Bakhmut is no longer at the moment this scene of worry for the Ukrainian forces and a scene of potential incoming victory for the Russians. Now, the War Mapper map doesn't reflect this. It still has this industrial area in the, well, I guess a sort of grey zone, and not under the control of the Russians. So I guess that is correct. They have been pushed out, and it's now a grey zone. But this line that they have is interesting. So this was where they had full control up to at some point. So that would have been their peak Russian advance. So that you would have had this dark red all the way up to this line, potentially. And now they've been pushed back here. And you can see that yesterday, according to War Mapper, there have been Ukrainian control has been pushed forward towards that road, and a little bit here just down south. This is the around that's a garbage disposal or the waste disposal sorting plant there. So you're pushing back around there. Whether you are more in line with this War Mapper map or no reports, or indeed what Riba have to say. Let's in fact look at what they have to say about the Bakhmut area and what's going on there. In Bakhmut, the Wagnerites are advancing along Maryinka Street in the southern part of the town. The enemy plans to organize a counteroffensive in this sector. Wagner units push territorial defense fighters out of western Klishchiivka. So, and then talk about, Solidar and Kurdyivka. Now, that's really interesting because this is entirely not what all the other sources are indicating. And in fact, some kind of footage might indicate as well. To say that, so what the Russians are saying is or what Riba are saying here is that the Russians are still pushing along this street. So the street they just mentioned there is this street going up and down. Let's get that street named. So this is this street that Riba claim the Russians are pushing westwards of. Well, all the other sources seem to indicate that the Russians have been pushed right out beyond this road here. So someone is wrong. Either all the Ukrainian sources are wrong, or Riba are wrong. You can decide. Let's move slightly further south. There are some claims now. So we move on to Opitny. So the claims are, as of yesterday, that really they've been pushed out. The Russians have been pushed out of Opitny, and there's a grey zone around there now. And normal sort of reports around Klishchivka and Kherson. But Defmon says something quite interesting of this particular area, that the canal area, here we are, I do not believe Russian forces have managed to cross the canal since they were last deleted west of it. So what this refers to is the canal area just here. So this is a canal that comes down through Mayorsk, up through Ozaryanivka and to Kherson and comes out here. Now, this canal has an entrenchment or a kind of sort of fortification that we saw hit by airburst shells the other day, and I've now seen footage of that, of Ukrainians walking around there filming all the dead Russians. I mean, it was pretty horrific, but you know, that was a big loss for the Russians. There was a lot of troops there, and what Defmon is saying is that since then, because there were some claims that the Russians still might have held this kind of triangle there, and that they did have some presence to the west of this canal. Well, Defmon is saying no, there's no presence of the Russians to the west of the canal. So that means again around here that the Ukrainians are actually doing some useful counterattacks that are regaining lost ground. So yeah, I think Bakhmut is this last week has been really good for the Ukrainians. I will say that. I'll put my opinion on the line there. It's been a good week for the Ukrainians around Bakhmut, and the Russians might have to regroup and think again about exactly what to do, or would it be more of the same, just waves and waves of human, meat to the meat grinder? We shall see. So as we come south, really quite a quiet day in terms of news. Just the usual sort of claims. There's still fighting going on in Avdivka, but nothing particularly interesting to remark upon. Pervomaisky, Pisky. There's a fascinating video that's come out of Avdivka that I want to talk about in my extra video. So I'll try and do that later. And then we come down, pressure on Krasnohorivka, but that's fairly well defended. And then Maryinka. So Maryinka seems to be, the big one. So what does no report say? Well, fighting still goes on over the whole front line. Not much changes. Russia hasn't got the numbers to force a breakthrough. Ukraine is on the defense. Fighting mostly around Maryinka, Novomykhailivka, Pervomaisky, and Avdivka. Yep, so just usual stuff. Now, here's an interesting video that gives you a sense of what Maryinka's like and the noise. This is about the soundscape of Maryinka here, as much as the visual destruction of the place. I think that's incredible footage, and just gives you a real sense of the smoke and the destruction and the sounds. Just incredible, absolutely incredible. So that's Maryinka, and you get these various claims. Go and have a check of reporting from Ukraine. He talks about this claim that they've got 80% of Maryinka, and he talks about how at the beginning of the 10 months they were back here in Maryinka, and they've got something like 12 streets in 10 months. It says at this rate, it will take them, another 10 months to take Maryinka completely. So they had these big claims, but those big claims never seem to be true. And in fact, though they might have taken 2 streets in one day, then they did nothing for 3 days. And so you just treat everything that really comes out of Maryinka with some degree of skepticism from either side, I guess, until the dust settles, and then you kind of survey things a few days later and see whether there really has been change or not. Okay, let's go further down south. So it's difficult to say, not a lot of detail out of Maryinka, not a lot of detail out of Novomykhailivka, but there is still repelled attacks around there. And then we come down to Vuhledar. I just want to show you a couple of images of Vuhledar that I think indicate that it is still under a lot of artillery pressure. So here you can see Vuhledar smoking. These are these high-rise buildings that have, I don't know what direction this is in, whether that's Vuhledar looking down on Pavlivka, or whether this is the front of Vuhledar, or the southern area of Vuhledar looking down on Pavlivka to the bottom of the screen. I'm not 100% sure. You've got blackened sides here, so it could be that this is the side that artillery gets hit. So this could be on the southern side. So Vuhledar is here, and that represents Vuhledar. I think somehow you've got a main road going diagonally from northeast down to southwest. So I reckon this could be looking back. That could be that line. This could be looking back on Vuhledar. So in other words, these buildings are the buildings that have that line of sight down to Pavlivka, and they can spot for artillery, but they can also fire ATGMs out of these windows and so on and so forth. This is a difficult nut to crack, but look at it; it's still under an enormous amount of pressure, and it looks like a typical Ukrainian settlement these days, which is completely destroyed and would need to be knocked down and rebuilt in its entirety. That pretty devastating there. But really not a lot of news out of this area in terms of any territory gained or lost, and the same goes for Zaporizhia and Kherson. So as we zoom out of Vuhledar and go down the Zaporizhia front line, there really I don't have anything to report about Zaporizhia, or particularly Kherson, other than Kakhovka was massively hit. And this is, I think, where one of those assassinations took place. So that's that car bomb that exploded in Kakhovka, and or at least a tiny settlement near there as well. Just interesting. This talks to that asymmetry I was talking about at the beginning of this piece. On December the 20th, Ukrainian defenders wiped out a troop and equipment concentration of the Russian fascist invaders at an airfield in the Kakhovka district in Kherson region. Up to 150 Russians were killed and about 50 wounded. Up to 20 units of military equipment were destroyed. Now, if that is true, even if some kind of percentage of that was true, some kind of meaningful percentage of this, so even, I don't know, 2/3, it's just a huge hit for the Russians, and that sort of stuff is going on every day. It just must be so devastating for their capabilities, for their capacity as a force and they'll always be worried about. I'd be worried sleeping in any barracks in HIMARS range, anywhere that's 100 kilometers from the front line. I would want to be sleeping on my own. Just yeah. Anyway, and another video I want to show you in my extra, if I have time, it's a really, really interesting video of a trench network that's somewhere along this coast. And they do observation onto the Kimban Peninsula, and they're constantly hitting this peninsula with artillery. And then they were talking about how they've had both cruise missiles and drone strikes going over there and having to try and shoot them down. But it also indicates possibly that the Ukrainians are not on the peninsula, but they are hitting it with artillery. But anyway, really interesting video. That's that. Sorry to have gone on too long today, but that's a Frontline update. Thank you for all your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. And you can buy my books, help me out with buy me a coffee or whatever, or just watch my videos and comment in the brilliant ways that 99% you do comment down below. Thank you for your brilliant contributions to the threads. Anyway, Toodle Pips, and I'll see you for the update extra.